I'm Julia Betancourt. I am a CPAC certified accessibility consultant here at Archdiocese. I come from a decade-long background in disability caregiving prior to joining Magic, and today I'm joined by two wonderful women in accessibility, Kelly and Julia. Kelly, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself? Sure. As soon as I turn on the microphone and practice what I preach. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Hermann. I am the Vice President of Accessibility, Equity, and Inclusion for the University of Phoenix. I've been doing disability access for almost as long as I think my co-panelists have been alive, which is a little bit scary to think about. But I have a background as a speech therapist and then transitioned into working in higher education to provide accommodations for students with disabilities. And at the University of Phoenix, I also have responsibility for digital accessibility and our Office of Educational Equity. And my name is Julia Betancourt. I've worked with a plethora of organizations, including CUNY City College, Warner College of Columbia University, and other institutions. I'm currently working with the Archdiocese of New York, and I'm an educator whose focus is primarily on trying to make sure that students with disabilities at all ages, elementary, middle, high school, higher education, have access to the resources that they need to succeed. Thank you so much, ladies. All right, so before we jump into our topic for today, show of hands who knows about digital accessibility, just generally. All right, enough hands, beautiful. Show of hands who knows about the updates made to Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. All right, a couple more hands, lovely. And how many of you feel directly responsible for digital accessibility within your organization? Okay, just a couple of hands, lovely. Well, I see only some of you raise your hands for that last question. However, I do need the rest of you to remain in the room for the rest of this presentation because it is everyone's responsibility to be involved in our accessibility journey, right? We want to make sure that everyone is creating a digitally experience for all types of learners. I know that we have a lot of people from various backgrounds joining us today. Some of you focus on publishing, some of you K-12, some higher education, some workforce development. Nevertheless, what organization or industry that you work in, Title II will most likely affect all of you. Our mantra here at EdTech is digital learning for everyone, and I hope you all believe the same. We will get into a little bit of how to make this mantra a reality. But let's start with basics. First, we'll talk about what is digital accessibility. So, digital accessibility is the mindset and practice of creating digital assets to be useful for people with disabilities, regardless of if they may or may not require use of assistive technology. As technology becomes increasingly ingrained in our daily lives, it is incredibly important that we develop technologies that promote equity and diversity. Absolutely. I knew this was going to happen. I can't stay quiet for too long. I just want to add, in terms of the definition of accessibility, one of the two pieces of it that are really, really important is that we want the content and the technology used by individuals with disabilities in an independent way. So this is why it's really important because you're focusing on your content, you're building it so that the person can use that regardless of having to use the assistive technology or to have someone who's sitting with them as a reader. That's not our strategy. That's not the preferred strategy when we're doing this. And the other piece of the definition that's really important is that it has to be with substantially equivalent ease of use. So that we want them to be independent and we don't want them to have to jump through too many hoops in order to be able to get to content that our people without disabilities can do that. So then I just wanted to make sure we had that. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. All right. So now moving on to Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. For those of you who may not be aware, Title II of the ADA requires state and local governments to make sure that their services, programs, and activities are accessible to people with disabilities. State and local governments that contract with other entities to provide public services for them also have to make sure that their contracts follow Title II. So within the scope of education, this typically will be your vendors, right? So state and local governments meaning some of the schools that may get government funding, and then contractors meaning perhaps some of the vendors that you will work with. Title II of the ADA was recently just updated to mandate WCAG 2.1 AA compliance. And these dates for compliance do vary depending on the size of the organization.
So, without any further ado, we'll get into our panel. Julia and Kelly, what are your impressions of the Title II update, and what suggestions can we give regarding this?
I just keep talking. But Title II, I think one of the things that I was really excited about when I saw the final rules come out from the Department of Justice is that the Department of Justice actually listened to those of us who submitted public comments, during the public comment period. If you have looked at the draft regulations, there were some components in there that actually kind of flew in the face of best practices that we've been talking about, especially in higher education, since the Kindle lawsuits were resolved back in 2009. And, there were some concerns that we had, in terms of what, the Department of Justice was saying that we had to do on a proactive basis, to ensure that our content was accessible, and kind of walk back on some of that. And so the final rule didn't include those provisions. They, very much so followed what those of us who've been talking about this since 2009 has said is really best practice in the field. And so, even, for me, as someone who works at an institution that is not covered under Title II because the University of Phoenix is a private institution and we're covered under Title III, this is an important development for us because it raises awareness in a lot of different ways, in ways that we've been trying to do as best practice as the Department of Education and the Department of Justice have followed through on enforcement actions under Section 504 of the Rehab Act of 1973. This opens up some doors for us in terms of streamlining some of those conversations, and really does kind of give us a baseline for what those best practices are and how we can ensure that we're designing our content and our curriculum and our resources for students with accessibility in mind, so it's welcoming and inclusive for all students regardless of what their ability is as they come to the table. Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. I think that it's also important to note that a lot of the feedback that wound up being given during the public comments period was addressed and was included, because all of that feedback is from people who live with this every single day of their lives. And so they're the ones who are saying, hey, this is what makes it accessible for me, for us, for our community, because they have that experience. We can do everything we would like to try to say, okay, this sounds like it's going to be a really good idea, let's implement it, but until we get that actual feedback from people who are living these experiences and have to use this every day, we're not going to know if it works. That experience is so important.
Thank you so much, Julia. And thank you so much, Kelly, for your answer. Kelly, you touched on something pretty important. So within the ADA Title II updates, there was also a bit of an update to Title III as well. And you mentioned that University of Phoenix falls under that Title III as opposed to Title II. Can you say that?
Sure. So the way that the Department of Justice, wrote this source, you kind of have to look at the updates to Title II in the wider context of what's been happening in the courts. And, most of us have heard about the Chevron decision and, what that means for some of the government entities in terms of, putting forward the regulations and, the powers that they have, to do that. So there's been a movement underfoot since the 20th anniversary of the ADA and the 25th anniversary of the ADA back in 2010 and 2015, where the Department of Justice was working on updated web accessibility rules. And it took us until 2024 where those final rules were actually published. And that's because a lot of politicking, because God knows we have a ton of politics in our society today, and it's not necessarily collaborative or friendly anymore. But the other piece of it is that we really need to look at how are they going to be able to influence the market and also be able to get everyone on the same page in a way that they can be able to say, let's follow best practice, let's get everyone moving in this direction, and where it wasn't going to necessarily be stymied by court action. So that's why you're seeing, in my opinion, Title II regs come out first instead of Title III regs coming out, where Title III would be applicable to more than just educational institutions and state and local governments. So when you look at Title II, it applies to, as I said, state and local governments, which includes community colleges, K-12 districts. It also includes any state public funded institutions. But for those of us who are at Title III institutions or places of public accommodations that, under the Title III language, we are still covered under this provisions of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which does indicate that we need to ensure that our programs, activities, and services are accessible to anyone with a disability, as well as we need to prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability. So even though Title II isn't going to directly apply to those of us in the room who might work at a private institution, it is still to our benefit, to look at what these regulations are and to, kind of come up with our game plan to get into compliance, because there is work being done by the Office, the Department of Education and the Office for Civil Rights, looking at Section 504. And what does Section 504 say? Do they need to adopt regulations for, in the Department of Ed for 504? You've already seen Health and Human Services update their regulations under Section 504 and the way that they implement and regulate 504. So if you are at an institution that has a medical facility, you likely are subject to the Title II regs, regardless of whether or not you're a private institution or a state public institution. So there are different components of this, but the bottom line for me is take a look at the regulations. Look at there's a lot of content that's out there from various organizations. Those of us who have been out talking about this for many years, been following best practices, looking at the procurement policies, talking to potential partners and vendors about what they're doing for accessibility, how are they integrating it into their products, how are they assessing for it, and then maybe seeing where you have gaps and holes in what it is you're doing, and coming up with your team, maybe whatever it is you're going to do to get yourself to a place where you're closer to the performance, even though you may not be subject to the April 2026 or April 2027 deadline. Thank you so much for that.
So as you can see, accessibility is applicable in many avenues within all of our jobs, right? One, we want to be sure that we're mitigating any legal risks that we may be exposed to as these regulations are constantly evolving and constantly changing as technology is becoming so integral within all of our daily lives, right? Two, we want to make sure that we're driving revenue as much as possible, right? When you're not including people with disabilities in the discussion, that's a very large part of that student population that you're not really catering to. If an organization is looking at adopting any kind of product services, if they can get a product or service that's going to comply and work for 100% of their students rather than 50 to 70% of their students, kind of no brainer, right? So going into our next question. Throughout EdTech, K-12 education, and higher education, we see a range of accessibility knowledge. Why do you think it's important for people at every department and every level to know about accessibility? And how can we ensure that everyone throughout the organization has a baseline knowledge of accessibility?
So accessibility isn't just one person's job. I know that sometimes as a society we like to perpetuate the myth, there's a person in this place whose job it is to work with those people, and it's their job and only their job to work on accessibility needs. That is not the case. It's everyone's responsibility to make sure that everyone is included. When I'm working with, especially when I'm working with elementary, middle school students, I like to put the onus on them. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. Take for a moment and think about, if everybody in this room was doing something to make everyone except you feel included. You were the only person that nobody was saying hello to in the morning. You were the only person who wasn't being offered a cup of coffee or breakfast. You were the only person who didn't have a chair to sit at, who was told, go sit at that table way over there where nobody else is. Would that make you feel welcomed? Would that make you feel like you want to be part of the community? And that's what the case is for people with disabilities. We want to make sure that they're being included and welcomed into the main group with everyone, not set off at some place over on the side where it's just them in isolation. We want to make sure that everyone is included all together. And that's why it's so important, not only that we're working towards solutions, but we're also aware of all these different guidelines and rules that help us to make sure that we're including people. Things like Section 504, things like Title II of the ADA, things like every single thing that gets put in place in order to help improve access and improve accessibility for everyone. And I have it written on my shirt today. The ABA is not a suggestion. Accommodations are not special treatment. We need to make sure. We need to make sure that we're accommodating and including everyone. This isn't special treatment. This is baseline. We are treating everyone as part of the human community that we are in.
Thank you so much for that.
So amazing. And it's really important, that, we have, voices, to answer this question, from people who have lived that life, right? And, Julia, has, talked about, her experiences and, the way in which, folks like me who are allies, advocates, in this, the world is actually paving the way so that those conversations can happen. Because there's nothing that is more compelling to a faculty member than hearing from a student of the ways in which they have just let that student out. And that's one of the things, I've been in higher education my entire career. I've talked with hundreds, if not thousands of faculty members over the years, and I've continually gotten the question, oh, but Kelly, can't we just put all of them over in that class over there and we just make that one accessible? No, that's called discrimination, so we can't do that, number one, and it's very similar to your table story. But the second piece is, I've had a lot of conversation with faculty where they say, Kelly, it's okay. This content is optional, right? Any of you ever heard that? Who've done this work before? That's optional. And my answer to that is great. Then you don't have to share it with any of your students. Oh, no, Kelly. It's going to enhance their learning. Okay, so then why is that not going to enhance the learning for your disabled students? By the way, we're going to make it accessible. You can't have it both ways. So it's important for every student to have access to it, or it's not important and we're going to take it down. So make your decision of which it is, because the content drives that decision, and then we'll help you make it accessible. And I think that's a really important part of the conversation is, we're having conversations with content developers, with faculty. I work with a lot of web developers now because my team at the University of Phoenix works with our folks who work on our website. You want people to see your work. You want people to get the benefit of that work. If you do, then you don't want to leave out a whole swath of our population who would not be able to access it. Let's figure out how we build into your process of making it accessible from the get-go. Promise you, it's not as hard as you're making it out to be. We just need to start earlier. And the thing is that we talk about it. Accessibility is not just my job. We have an institutional culture of accessibility, which means that we are thinking about our students and that we're thinking about all of the students because we don't know who's coming to our sites. And we want them to have the same kind of University of Phoenix experience that every other student has. And that's important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, ladies. On the same note of ensuring that we are all as educated about disability and accessibility and catering to all of our learners with disabilities, right? Ladies, I would like to ask you about trainings and what your opinions on trainings are, integrating them within your organization, within different types of organization throughout education. And
my big theme of training is because I usually have a group of educators that I have to train who, by the way, are terrible students because they think they know everything and they don't want to hear from the redhead who's going to tell them you need to do something different, right? I mean, how many of you, like on the show of hands, how many of you are really excited when your organization sends out a note that says, hey, by the way, you've got this training to go through? Oh, only one in the back. A couple of good certificates back in the back, but I even hate seeing those emails come through. So for me, the most important thing about training when we're talking about accessibility training is that you need to make it practical, it needs to be relevant, it needs to be timely. We've all sat through the anti-discrimination EEOC type trainings where it is the most ridiculous scenarios that would never happen in real life ever. And it's great for being able to pass the quiz and say, yeah, I got my gold star, I passed the training. But I mean, come on, what do we take away from those? In all seriousness, we don't take much away other than that's really bad acting, and those scenarios would never happen. And if it did happen, like, holy cow, like really like that? No. It's much more nuanced, it's much more subtle when you see it in real life. And so for me,
the thing is, I have 3,000 faculty who are serving 80,000 students. 15,000 of those students are accommodated. And so what do I need those faculty to know about that disability experience and the experience of using accommodations, and what it is that they need to do, and how can they integrate it into what they're already doing? That's probably the most important part. I need to make it simple. When we're asking faculty to share descriptive hyperlinks in their discussion post responses with students, I need to tell them how to do that simply. And by the way, if you did not know, click here is not an appropriate descriptive hyperlink because it's not descriptive. And, it's really important that you're using keywords. So those are things that we need to, be able to build into our, trainings for our faculty, that they're going to, number one, feel like they're being supported, because that's the most important part. My constituents at my institution, it's not just the students. Faculty are a really important part of the population that I serve. They need to feel supported. We need to demystify it, and we need to myth bust. We need to take out some of the fear and anxiety that comes with working within a very legally rated area of higher education, where people are afraid of being seen as, the person who's proverbially kicking the kid in the wheelchair and just being mature. And so how do we do that in the safe space where the faculty can then, or, my web developers or my software engineers that are working on other resources can take it away and say, hey, I learned something, and this is going to help me upskill.
And on top of that, it's not just making sure that all of our trainings are relevant and that we're engaged and we know how this applies in our daily lives going forward, but also we want to hear from a variety of experiences and backgrounds. There's one organization I worked with in the past where every single time that there was a training on accessibility, I could name exactly who was doing it because it was always the exact same person every single time. And don't get me wrong, she's absolutely great at what she does. I think she does a wonderful job. But aside from the fact that it shouldn't always be on her and other people should step up and take that responsibility, we're only hearing one perspective. We want to hear multiple perspectives from multiple different people, both within the organization who are seeing the ins and outs of day-to-day life, and also from people from the outside who may have other perspectives that they can add in. And if you are that person who's working on trainings for your organization, or you're able to talk to the person who's working on trainings, that's also really helpful in making sure that these different trainings really get at the specific issues that will affect your organization. Back when I was working with the United Nations, I had one of my colleagues was talking to me about a specific issue in terms of disability discrimination that was happening within her specific work cohort. And, I made sure I didn't give any specifics about the specific names or diagnoses or anything when I did this, but I took a lot of the information of what was going on and I used it in a training later on, so that way people could see, hey, this situation that is actually unfolding changed a little bit to ensure anonymity, because I don't want anyone to feel called out or, isolated or anything like that. But the situation that looks remarkably similar to things actually going on, we can take that and we can address it and we can see, hey, this is what we should do if we're participating in this, if we see this happening, and here's how we make it relevant to the actual situation that is happening right here on a day-to-day basis. And, people will be people. Sometimes, we can't prevent these things, but we can at least make ourselves aware so that when we do see these things happening, we know what we can do to stop it, to make sure that everyone is doing what they're supposed to and feels welcomed and included in a space that's not just accessible on a physical, I can get to whatever materials I need for my work, but also on a social level of, I can come into my workplace and be welcomed and included at all times. So I had one thing, because I think what you just said was really important, which is that, there are so many times that, we encounter teachable moments in our day-to-day work. For me, it's almost daily. And, I think the way that we handle those teachable moments is so incredibly critical, because if I make someone feel badly for asking a question, or if I, tell them, hey, you've used the term wheelchair bound to describe somebody who uses a wheelchair, and can I just explain to you why we don't use that phrase and what that phrasing actually is implying. But if I came in and go, oh my God, I cannot believe you just said that, like, are you so stupid or whatnot? That person's not going to come back to me. They're not going to come and ask me questions. They're not going to trust me. I'm going to erode them. And again, the person who needs to have that awareness and to understand that is just as deserving of my respect as my students who are using accommodations. And that's how I can then, create more awareness, and I can, have everyone buy into the idea that accessibility is everyone's job. So it's really important how we handle those things, especially those of us who are in roles as advocates and allies, because we want to continue to advance, the conversation, not, hold it back. Yes, we're sorry. We're working on trying to call people in, bring them into the conversation and say, hey, here's how you can improve, instead of calling out and saying, hey, that was awful, you should never do that again. Focus on the positive reinforcement, not negative, no, you're wrong, you're horrible, I don't like what you're doing. And sometimes it's hard. We can all agree it's not easy to be positive all the time, but especially when we're trying to improve things, focus on that positive reinforcement.
Absolutely, ladies. Thank you so much for that. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's very important when we're coming from a place of education to do it in a kind manner and know that a lot of the time it's not malicious, it's just lack of education, correct? So yeah, on that same line of trainings, I heard a lot of making sure that it's relevant to your staff, right? Making sure that we are including different perspectives and including real life experiences, and making sure that it's worthwhile and we're doing it for the right reasons. So we do have some polls for you. Here we go. Yeah, nice little news for you. Which reads, focusing on accessible designs because it's a legal requirement. Focusing on accessible designs because it's a good accessibility benefit. Because good accessibility benefits every user. We love it. All right. Now we have some polls. So, Harsh will take it away for us. So you can go ahead and scan the QR code. We'll give you a second to do that and get it up on your phones. And just so you're aware, as we go through the remainder of our sessions, if you do miss the QR code on the top, you can see the join@menti.com, and then there's a code. You can type it in that way as well. All right, and our first Menti poll for this session is, do you have ally trainings offered within your organization? Well, I was going to say, I see majority yes, but I see that no comment.
I would really like to see some more no, but we plan to instead of just regular no's.
All right, so I see that we have a good mix. Absolutely, after hearing this conversation today, I hope that you all understand the value of accessibility trainings within your organizations. And if you ever need help, I'm here. You know where to find me. All right, we have one more Menti poll. Do you think ally trainings would be valuable within your organization? Oh, I'd love to see that. Thank you so much. All right, and then I have one more question that will be a raising hands. So, what teams do you think would benefit the most from accessibility trainings? Yes, last presentation. Yeah?
The engineering groups.
Engineering, absolutely. What do you got? Senior leadership, absolutely.
Yeah, don't leave out the senior leaders, because there's so many competing priorities and they make resource decisions, and it's really, really important that they understand what it is that we have to do.
Absolutely. All right, so those were marketing, absolutely. All amazing answers. The overarching answer is going to be everyone should be included in accessibility trainings. All right. So, ladies, I have another question for you. How can organizations ensure ongoing compliance? We know that in this landscape, digital requirements are always changing, always advancing. So, what suggestions can you give people in regards to this?
So I think for us at the University of Phoenix, we talk about this all the time. And, it's kind of like the quote from Teddy Roosevelt, so many years ago, to speak softly and carry a big stick. And, that certainly is the approach that I take, when we're talking about digital accessibility and compliance, with the ADA and Section 504. People are afraid of the legal, ramifications of it, but they also don't want to hear about that. They don't want you to come into a conversation with them where all you talk about, well, the law says this, and the law says that, and the law says, this thing. And we have to do all this because the law says, or they don't want the attorneys coming in. And I joke all the time that, I'm not an attorney, but I play one on TV, only as it relates to ADA's Section 504 and a little bit for which is the Privacy Act. But the important thing is to come in and, within the idea of the conversation of, talk to me about what it is that you have to do. What are your KPIs? What are your goals? What are your objectives? What are you building? And what is it that you need to do? And then we integrate my digital accessibility team into those conversations so that when they're talking about design, we can have that conversation about, well, if you did this button this way, it would work like this, and that's going to make it more accessible. Instead of, and this happens way too frequently, we're going to, let the designers and the developers and the architects do all their work, and then we'll send it to you accessibility as if it's one step in QA. It's not, and it doesn't work that way, because then what you wind up having is getting back, work that has, well, this code doesn't work, and this button doesn't do what it says it does. You have your heading order all out of sorts. The reading order on this is not right. So there are so many different parts of it that integrating it, throughout is actually the way that we are best able to ensure that we're in compliance and in concordance, with what the regulations say. But also a big part of it, again, goes to the training and upskilling our engineers. Most of your colleagues that work in that area have never been exposed to accessibility fundamentals. And so when we start teaching them what it is that my testers are able to do and when they understand, they can then build that into the design work and the development work that they're doing. And they're really excited to then show off their work. And so we really do approach it from a partnership and a collaborative, standpoint. And it goes back to asking really good questions about where they are and where they need to go. And then, being really respectful about how we, suggest they integrate accessibility into the work that they're already doing. So it doesn't seem like it's an add-on. And then we're going to save them from having to go back and retrofit, which is definitely more timely and a lot more costly to go back and retouch work that you thought was done.
Absolutely, yeah. The board accessible or shift left mentality approach, however you want to phrase it, is absolutely so important. Really good for that.
What Kelly's getting at here, it's called universal design, and it's this idea that instead of making something and trying to implement accessibility afterwards, retroactively make it accessible, you're going to build it to be accessible from the ground up. And anytime that we're doing something so that whatever we need is already in there, it's going to be easier, no matter what it is. Does anyone remember playing with Legos when they were a kid? You know how sometimes when you're trying to put something inside your Lego house, it's easier to put it in there from the beginning than to build a house, then build it separately, and then try to somehow figure out how you're going to get the little Lego couch into the Lego house? That's essentially what we're trying to do with accessibility. Instead of trying to figure out how we're getting our Lego couch, going to shove it in through that tiny Lego door that only people fit through. If anyone's ever tried to move a couch into an apartment without an elevator, you probably understand the pain of this even more. And then, yes. So, that was my fault. Comedic moment. I just watched that episode of Friends not too long ago. So, no, it was a good one. It was a really good one. But yes, we're essentially trying to avoid the pivot and the couch breaking. We want to make sure that everything's already set up, so it's already there. And we don't have things breaking down as we're trying to include them in later.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those answers, ladies. All right. Another area that we don't exactly have a ton of time to go into this, but if you are looking at ongoing compliance, AI is another area where NATCHA has a ton of offerings that can help you in that ongoing compliance. And then, of course, it wouldn't be AI if we didn't have people looking over it to make sure that our AI is listening and we're all doing the right thing. So this need says you performed automated testing on your page. It must be fully accessible. So always make sure that you have manual review over it. All right, and one last one before we go, web accessibility. Don't let humble cost you it. Thank you so much.
Does anybody have any questions for any of our panel before we move on? Yeah, there's a question. Yeah.
I used to work in education before I joined publishing, and in physical education, at least restricted environment is like what you really push for accessibility. And have you seen least restrictive environment being presented for like digital environments? Because it's not a phrase I really hear in digital design or publishing.
Yeah, I think, it's a really good question. And that's actually one of the strategies that we take at the University of Phoenix is how can you kind of take that concept of least restrictive environment and, apply that into the digital environment. And I actually do it through, talking about universal design. And when we talk about universal design, I don't do universal design for learning or universal design for instruction. Those are just some different theoretical applications of universal design. I go back to the original architectural principles of universal design. And so if you're not familiar with those, it's things like your curb cuts, your lever door handles. And we really talk about making the environment usable by the most number of people possible. So things like a curb cut were certainly invented because of somebody who needed to use a wheelchair or a different mobility device. But when you're going, and I just did this morning, walking up from my other hotel to this hotel with my suitcase behind me, and I'm using curb cuts to be able to get up and down from the sidewalks. So even though I don't have a physical disability, it made the environment more usable for me. So when I'm talking about the digital environment, when I'm talking about my learning management system, and I'm talking about the design of our classroom, or we're talking about web resources, I am talking about spacing of icons. I'm talking about, where things are positioned on the page, and kind of thinking about, appropriate space for size and use. I think I said that backwards, but making sure that folks can navigate through all of that, and also being able to think about the layout, where things are setting on the page from a usability perspective. We partner really closely with our usability and user testing teams to kind of marry the two principles together in terms of thinking about those things. So for me, it comes back to being really proactive, understanding who our users are. That's why it's really important that we talk a lot about who our students with disabilities are that we know about at the university, because I can tell you how many blind students have registered with my office, but I will also tell you that we've partnered with one of our library databases, to have a link that's only available for screen reader users to request, accessible, formats. And we had about 15 students start using that link within the first week it was turned on, and only, I think, only 1 or 2 were known to our office. So that meant we had more blind students sitting in our classes than we knew about who were using that assistive technology. So that's information that we share constantly with our teams that are developing those digital spaces so that they understand what those needs are, and that we start, talking about how are we going to build that in so that, everyone feels welcome and they can do what they need to do independently, but substantially equivalent ease of use by using, UX principles, accessibility principles, and universal design. So I hope that helps.
Any other questions? Yeah.
One next point is out there, and it exists, and I'll look at it after that. Our practice is to always stay ahead of what's happening, but at some point that will become the rule. And so if you constantly stay with those secrets and know what the statements are, you'll be ahead. You won't have to go trying to go back and do that couch.
Right, you'll have to pivot. And so for anyone who didn't hear that in the room, just from an accessibility standpoint, following the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, 2.2 is being released. They are always releasing those standards, and that's an international body that is, constantly looking at those standards and making sure that it stays up to date. So yes, the federal government will always, in the US, lag behind in terms of what the requirements are, because up until you saw the Title II regulations come out this spring, earlier this year, we were still talking about 2.0. And, it's really important, to understand what those are. And as technology evolves, this is where we talk about all the time. Accessibility is a journey, not a destination. You're never done. I tell my boss all the time, if I start telling you, hey, we're good to go, we have we're done with accessibility, that you probably should have me, evaluated for my mental health and confidence, because I probably have lost cognition somewhere, because we're never done. Every new release is an opportunity to make things better and to make things worse. And the W3C is constantly, as soon as they release one standard, they're looking at the next set. And with the the iteration of generative AI and assistant, that artificial intelligence, there's so many ways that it makes things better, but there's also opportunities for them to that tool to make things worse. And you're going to see, I think, a lot of changes in terms of the standards and being able to deal with, especially generative AI and output that comes from AI and what that means for accessibility.
Right. And if your content itself, national ADA is already.
I also just want to add in that, this is on, okay. I also just want to add in that legal compliance is different from full compliance. Just because something is legally compliant does not mean that it is fully accessible to anyone or everyone. So anytime you're trying to stay a step ahead, make sure things are even more accessible than what the law requires, that's already a great thing. That's what we should all be striving to do. Thank you so much.